The 2024 Speed Chess Championships have just finished, and somewhat unsurprisingly, Magnus Carlsen has come out the victor. But what is more surprising is the dominant fashion in which he did it. The scores finishing up were 23.5 to Magnus, 7.5 for Firouzja. That's a plus 16 score for Magnus Carlsen. Which is truly, truly incredible, especially considering the fantastic form that Firouzja was in, beating Hikaru convincingly 2 days ago. Now, I've selected one game that I think is just a great example of Magnus's opening preparation and really just his play on all sides of the board. Early on, Firouzja had actually scored 2 nice victories, but after those 2 victories, Magnus came fighting back with this game, and ever since this one, it was all Magnus the entire way. He dominated the 3+1 section 7-2, I think, and then the bullet was no different. Okay, so Firouzja started with pawn to d4. We have knight f6, e6. This is fairly standard Nimzo Indian. Alireza going for a very, very confrontational setup with pawn to a3, inducing this capture on c3, which does give white the doubled structure, but he's going to go f3, e4, and take a huge central space. Magnus goes for knight c6 rather than a more standard b6 and c5 approach. But Magnus obviously had something cooked up in this line, so he does go for the b6 with knight on c6, and then he plays bishop to a6. The idea of bishop a6 is that you're going to go knight a5 in the future, and you're going to build up against this c4 pawn with d6, stuff like this. Firouzja goes bishop to g5, Magnus kicks it with h6, and an aggressive g5. Clearly, Magnus was still ready with g5. Firouzja moving very quickly, though. He has got the confidence of a couple good wins just before this game. Now, bishop to f2 makes a lot of sense. You put the bishop in the cubby and, just bring it back, guarding the center. Potentially, if it pushes, it could escort c5. Magnus plays knight to h5, which I imagine is still in his preparation. No game. Oh no, there are a couple games in the database still here. In fact, Magnus Carlsen versus Peter Leko, 2007. So clearly Magnus knows what he's doing in this setup. And actually, this is back when Magnus was lower rated than Peter Leko, which is quite astonishing. Magnus was under 2700 2007. Wow, that's quite something. So he's been in the 2700 club for almost 15 years now, over 15 years. That's crazy. Anyway, knight h5. He's targeting the f4 square. He's looking to bring the queen into f6 and maybe try and start some kingside. Actually, it's more pressure on the queen side from the king side or towards the center with these pieces here. Firouzja tries to strike back with h4. Been talking a lot about Hans Niemann recently with his, Hikaru match, his Magnus match, but Hans Niemann is not the guy playing. It is Magnus Firouzja, and Magnus responds with queen to f6, defending the rook so that if you capture and try to play g4, you can simply move the knight to f4, and the rook is not hanging. It is guarded by the queen. Okay, so after this queen to f6, we get pawn to e5. Queen goes to g7, remains guarding the rook here so that h captures is not a problem. Pawn goes to g3, and here Magnus starts putting all of... he castles first, and then after bishop to d3, he breaks with pawn to f6. He puts his other horse on the rim a little bit later on, but at the moment Magnus is just gotten his king out of the center so that now it is nice and safe, and he's free to break open the central position, increasing the pawn tension. And after pawn to f4, which is the only move, by the way, no other moves were good here. Pawn f4 was necessary to try and hold everything together. After f4, Magnus plays this very classy move, pawn to f7, just guarding the horsey, nice and patient here. He doesn't rush, he doesn't just capture and start chopping down the forest. Not that Firouzja would have taken back, actually that would have been a free knight. I don't really know why the engine even approves of this. Maybe it thinks that the pawn is going to make it and be a nuisance. But after pawn to f4, Magnus, of course, just guards his horsey. and after a capture, Firouzja actually finds a nice continuation here. He starts chopping down the forest. If you don't start capturing, apparently the engine is saying that it's basically game over. The only alternative is bishop to e2, but then the knight is going to reposition, and you're going to break open the position, and it's going to be very dangerous. So Firouzja does find the correct continuation here, and he finds the move queen f3, trying to force off the queens here. If you weren't to keep the queens on the board, then I guess you would just get castled and give white a little bit too much on the f-file. So Magnus does exchange off the queens, but only because of a very, very nice tactical continuation, knight to f4, given the double exclamation mark here. The idea is that if you were to take the rook, then I will take the bishop in between move, the king moves, I take your rook, and then if you take my knight, I return to the f-file, skewering the two pieces. If the king moves over, then I'm guessing just knight h5 and goes for c4. That's pretty much game over. Maybe include g4 somewhere as well. Additionally, if you just capture the knight, there's the very simple taking of the rook, and the other rook would fall unless you block, but that's still just giving an exchange. And yeah, that's really all to say about knight to f4. Very, very nice find from Magnus. And the only response, by the way, bishop to h7. Now, the much more natural move, king to d2, would be met with knight takes on d3, and oh yeah, just skewering the pieces here nicely like this. And if the king is to return, then g4, the knight can move, and I guess knight a5, and the entire position is crumbling. This structure is very fragile, and with the king literally being the most advanced piece, this would not have been good for Firouzja. But instead of that, bishop to h7 could have been played, would have saved the game, even though you could play knight d3 anyway. And the point is that if you capture the knight, you would capture the rook, but instead you could go king to e2. And now the knight is actually under threat from the king with this loose bishop over here. You'd have to go knight to b2, return, and you would capture c4, and this position looks pretty crazy. There is knight takes g5, but this would have been a complete mess. But definitely black doing better with the pawn structure. However, Firouzja wasn't quite feeling it. I do actually think he had just lost a game, lost his momentum right before this, so maybe his confidence had been knocked. He did just capture, knight takes on d3, went for the line that I discussed earlier, knight to a5, going after the c4 pawn, g4 is in the woodworks, and after pawn to g4, Firouzja simply resigns the game because the rook is going to infiltrate to f3. Let's say you play a random move, knight takes on c4, takes, a rook to f3, and after the king moves, check, king moves, I guess you can just play rook takes on c3, and it's way too many pawns, all the other pawns super fragile. Firouzja didn't want to look at this game anymore, and Magnus Carlsen wins a brilliant 99% accuracy game. So that's all I've got for you guys today. A nice short video. If you guys did enjoy it and find the game interesting, please do consider liking and subscribing. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.